we're recording now, and I'm going to start letting everyone in. See if it's popping up there.
Just put on a light.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all the familiar faces. Emily, I'm always very impressed by that collection of spirits behind you. It's quite the setup. So, folks, as per usual, for those of you who are joining us for maybe the first time, we're normally going to give it a minute at this stage and just make sure that everyone's settled in and audio's connected, and that any late stragglers join us before we formally get started. But as always, it's good to see the familiar names popping up. That light hasn't made a huge difference, Sean, I must say. There you go. There's kind of no activity. Oh, there we are. One more person joining the waiting room. So not a lot of Liverpool fans on tonight, I imagine. So there we go. I think that the waiting room is kind of settled in there now. There's no one kind of joining. So if everyone's ready to start, anyone with the video, I'm going to give me a thumbs up and we'll get going. There you go. Brilliant. At least 2 thumbs. So we'll start. So folks, thank you very much for joining us. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name's Luke. I'm the general manager of the Celtic Whisky Bar and Larder and Irish Whisky Experience down in Clarny. We're the world's largest collection of Irish whisky. We're one of the largest whisky bars in the world as well. We've got 1,500 different whiskies, but 750 of them are Irish, and the rest are Scotch, Japanese, you name it, American. We have it. We've got a lovely bespoke cocktail menu, all craft beer, a fantastic restaurant, and obviously we're home to the Irish Whisky Experience, which is like a visitor attraction / education side of things, where we talk you through the enjoyment and tasting and history of Irish whisky. So almost all of what I've listed has been on hiatus for the last year, hence how we've started doing these virtual tastings. And before I ask Sean to introduce himself, who I'm delighted to be joined with, I think this is going to be a really interesting tasting. A break from our last tasting, Sean, was a tequila tasting, so it's good to get back to the home stuff. So before I do ask you to introduce yourself, Sean, I'd love to get everyone on here. Just get your questions in throughout and get your tasting notes. If you want to hear questions and tasting notes, don't be shy, get them in the chat, and that's what I'm here for, to facilitate them passing over to Sean. We have a comment in the thing there about background noise, so I might I'll mute myself unless I'm talking, just in case it's coming from my end. But anyway, Sean, thank you so much for joining us and joining us with the range here. Before we get started, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to be sitting here representing the Jack Ryan whiskey brand?
Well, thanks, Luke, and hello everybody, and thanks for having Jack Ryan Whiskey today. My name is Sean Conroy, and I've been working with the Ryan brothers in Jack Ryan Whiskey for about 7 years now. I guess I'm a family friend, and I went to school with Conor, in medical school with Conor. I'm retired now, and I do a little bit of writing for them, and also plotting and planning the whiskies. So I'm a bit long in the tooth, but then the whiskey is old as well, and sometimes things get better with age. Jack Ryan Whiskey is a revival of Ryan's malt, which was the Ryan family malt. It was revived in 2013, just a year after, I suppose, the rebirth of Irish whiskey. Yunnan is the current Ryan scion. His dad was Jack Ryan, the eponymous Jack. And Jack's father, Thomas, set up his own whiskey finishing in 2013. And he set it up in an iconic place. Many of you would know it, Ryan's Beggar's Bush. And indeed, the Ryan's Beggar's Bush is still in the family hands. So I suppose the whiskey, the revival whiskey of the brand, was the Jack Ryan 12-year-old, which I think is what we're going to taste first. And indeed, if you look at the bottle, you'll see the logo says Ryan's Beggar's Bush. And the Beggar's Bush refers to the part of Dublin where Thomas Ryan set up his whiskey finishing and where the family still have a pub. And of course, Beggar's Bush is beside the barracks, the Beggar's Bush barracks. And let's face it, it's a rather historic part of Dublin. So really, Jack Ryan Whiskey, I suppose, in summary, and we can talk later about the development of the brand and what's happened since, is a Dublin-based, family-owned, independent whiskey finishing company. We buy aged malt and we finish it in our own casks. And so I guess, Luke, you could go on and maybe begin to taste the 12-year-old. I have all the bottles here. I noticed that my own 12-year-old is a little bit low. Obviously, it was a leaky bottle. I'm not sure where it went. It certainly wasn't me. It couldn't have been me. So I guess maybe you could start with the tasting.
Yeah, marvelous. So we're going to start with the 12-year-old. I know a lot of people who join in the chat like to know the running order so that they can kind of have it all out in front of them. So we are going to start with the 12-year-old, and correct me if I'm wrong here. We're going to go for the Tunavara, then the Haddington, then followed by the finisher's touch, and then the Madeira cask at the end.
That's right, Luke. Yeah. So again, you can judge for yourselves that the color of the 12-year-old, and let's face it, we're talking shades of yellow. I mean, and it's difficult to appreciate color over Zoom, but you all have your own samples. I guess if you swirl it, it is fairly viscous. There's a fair bit of oil to be seen when you swirl it. And I suppose, let's face it, the nose is a classic bourbon finish nose. And even as we start with the first whiskey, from my perspective, I know that taste and smell are so intertwined, number one, and number two, they're linked to the amygdala, which is one of the oldest parts of the brain. So of course, taste and smell evoke all kinds of things. So actually, I don't think any two people really taste the same thing. And maybe that's why sometimes the story of a whiskey gives you some taste, because the story evokes something in you. And I suppose I'm saying that at the first tasting, because I think it's true of all the subsequent ones as well. But in any event, it's a classic bourbon finish, We were fortunate enough with this very first release to win an Irish Whiskey Award for the best single malt 12 years or under at the Irish Whiskey Awards in 2014, I think it was, Luke.
Oh, it's got a stunning nose. It's lots of kind of, as you say, classic kind of stewed apples. They kind of touch of honey and vanilla in there as well. It is a high quality nose. So this is all ex-bourbon 12-year-old. Can you tell us the source of it?
Yeah, we source aged malt. We source it at 10 years of age. The two batches we've got to date have been Cooley whiskey. So Cooley whiskey, 10-year-old. That doesn't mean our next lot mightn't be from somewhere else, but certainly we've stuck with single malt, and I think we intend to stick with single malt. And we aged it for 2 years in our own casks.
It's got a gorgeous taste to it. It's kind of subtle spice, it's really citrusy, kind of touch of kind of pastry notes. It's a really good quality single malt. As I mentioned at the start, I'd love to hear what everyone in the chat thinks. But I think it's a strong start. I suppose was there a moment of inspiration, Sean, that made the family decide that this is the way they wanted to go in terms of finishing whiskey, or is there a specific?
Well, I think Jack himself, who died relatively young in 1979, was Thomas's son, and Thomas, I guess, had greatly enjoyed his tours of the Big Four way back at the start of the century, picking out his barrels. I mean, let's face it, an awful lot of the whiskey producers have much the same story, where they sourced barrels and they had their favorite barrels and they had their favorite distilleries, and of course Irish whiskey was bottled by the vintners. The Scottish started bottling. The Scottish distilleries started bottling. The Irish Big Four were very late into it. The Irish Big Four figured, we make fantastic whiskey, take it in casks and good luck. And let's face it, lots of vintners like Thomas and subsequently Jack used to have their little trips every few months to their favorite distillery, where they'd look for their favorite barrel and bring it back. And it was always single malt, of course, Dublin single malt. So since it's what the family always did, it's what they stuck with. They weren't, I don't think they ever had a tradition of pot still. It was always single malt. And I guess we've decided to stick with it.
And do you know what distilleries they would have dealt with historically of those Big Four? Sorry, did you catch me? Can you hear me?
A little bit of noise there, Luke, but carry on.
All right. I was saying, of those Big Four, where would they have been sourcing their malt from historically? Would they have had a relationship?
I think Thomas did a lot with DDL, and I know that Jack when Jack was sourcing it, it was in the 30s and 40s. A lot of it was reserved whiskey, as you know. It was on the downturn already by then. And certainly I know that BDL was one of his favorites, definitely.
Perfect. Well, I'm just going to, I appear to be having some technical issues on my end. So if you want to tell us a bit more, talk us a bit more through about this 12-year-old, and I'm just going to mute myself and see if I can rectify the audio issues I'm having for 2 seconds.
Sure. Well, look, again, obviously, far be it from me to tell you what it tastes like. As I say, what you think it tastes like is what it tastes like, because your own emotions and etc. and your own memories will be evoked in the whiskey. We do try to enter the whiskies in peer review competitions. Last year we entered in nothing because it was a crazy year, but we did enter this whiskey also in the San Francisco World Spirits, and it won a gold. So of course we were very encouraged by the 12-year-old because it was the first release of the revival and it won a couple of good rewards. And yeah, it certainly did encourage us to go on. And so we are committed to peer review in good competitions, double-blind taste testing, etc. I know he's now discredited, but Jim Murray gave it a 92.5, I think, in his whiskey Bible. He turned out to have more Old Testament problems than New Testament problems, I think, and so we won't quote him any further. But it was well received, and yes, it did encourage us. And actually, subsequently, although I know it's not available unless you guys have some of it still, Luke, we then brought out the Bordiga, which was a 15-year-old finished in sherry. I think it's all sold out. So this also won a silver, I think, in the San Francisco World Spirits. So again, we were encouraged, but I think the success of the 12-year-old made us think that as an independent whiskey finisher, we had to do something different or something special, because let's face it, we're not distillers. We don't pretend to be distillers. And so what we've really settled on since the 12-year-old is to look at kind of specific collaborations. We source our own casks. We've sourced casks from the States, from Spain, from Portugal, from France, from Germany, and we've built up a kind of an eclectic repertory of casks. So the direction we've tried to go in any event is we, as a kind of a, for want of a better phrase, I suppose, an artisan, if you like, a craft whiskey finisher, to partner with small quality drinks producers. And I guess after you've tasted this and we move on, I can explain a bit more what we've been trying to do subsequent to the 12-year-old.
Oh, very good. I don't know if you can hear me a bit better now. I think it's the fan on my laptop is acting up, so some gremlins in the works. But the 15-year-old, we actually do have an open bottle in the bar still. So if people are able to get down to Crowley when we're able to reopen, we'll have a bit for you there.
There was also the centenary. I guess I should have said that the 12-year-old was released in 2013, which was 100 years after Thomas started up in the Beggar's Bush. So it was the centenary release, if you like. And this one is also called the centenary. It's a 15-year-old cask strength, 57.5 cask strength, again finished in bourbon. And that was released in 2015 to celebrate the birth of Jack, the eponymous Jack. So I suppose the revival started off kind of noting, or if you like, celebrating the family milestones. And we've moved on now to the kind of collaboration we'll talk about in a moment.
Well, it's an excellent start. I've got some great comments coming in from the chat. David says, great start, lemon biscuit for me. 100% that sort of pastry, lemony zestiness definitely comes through. Derek Kelly says it's a great whiskey, so it's a good one to start with. I hope everyone can hear me better now. Apologies about that. Jack says the laptop is fixed right there, Luke, and I think it's normally very reliable. But as I know most people do on the tastings know, I don't normally have technical issues, but obviously it's nice we decided to act up and go down strike.
Luke, for whatever reason, there's a lot of noise when you speak there. Is there a lot of noise when I speak? Can people? Okay. Well, look, even though I know you're to guide this, Luke, because of the fact that there's a lot of noise when you speak, will I talk a bit about the trilogy?
Do you want to talk a bit about the trilogy and maybe introduce the two Navara? And I've actually got I'm going to try and switch to an alternative microphone source. So apologies about this, folks. It'll be 2 seconds and I'll grab it. If you want to talk about the trilogy in the meantime, it'll be 2 seconds.
Okay. So this is completely unscripted, so please forgive me if it's not quite to the point, but I guess just to say that when we released the 12-year-old, you might notice that on the label it says Beggar's Bush. And as I was saying, that's to reflect the fact that that pub is still in family hands, and it's where the whiskey finishing started. But after the release of the 12-year-old, we began to think that there was a danger that we'd be assumed to be just another pub brand. Not that there's any problem with pub brands, please don't think I'm suggesting there is, but we're not a pub brand, because even though we may not distill, but we do finish. You know, we have our own casks, we have our own bonded warehouse, we bottle our own. And we form our own alliances for collaborative finishes. So we were a bit afraid, I suppose, that with the explosion of whiskey companies after 2012, or I suppose maybe around 2010, that we just get swallowed up as just a pub brand, which we're not. So we actually kind of redesigned the logo. And if you see in this Tumivara, we've kind of redesigned the logo, and the logo now, I guess, says whiskey finishers, family owned since 1913, because I guess that's what we're trying to say, that we're whiskey finishers, that we're not a pub brand. Okay, there is a pub in the family, but it's beside the point. It's of historical interest, but it's not what defines us. So after releasing the 12-year-old in 2013, a century after it started, and for example, the centenary in 2015, 100 years after Jack was born, we then figured, look, we might as well do two things: carry on the theme of family, but also start the collaborations. So in terms of the theme of family, in terms of the naming and the name ideas, which I guess is my department, I figured that we'd release a trilogy, and we'd call it the Generation Trilogy, because right now there's Yunnan and Connor, Ryan. Their dad was Jack, his dad was Thomas, and actually Thomas came from Tumivara, and his father John, and before his father Michael, were involved not as distillers or finishers, but they were barley farmers and they worked in distilleries. So if you like, there's a thread of 6 generations involved with whiskey. So we figured we'd release a trilogy. We'd call it the Generation Trilogy. So we named the first one Tumivara, because that's where Thomas is from. We named the second one Haddington, because the Beggar's Bush is on Haddington Road. And we named the third one Finisher's Touch, because we'd like to think that at this stage, the family does have the Finisher's Touch. So that's the thinking behind the names. Now, in terms of the actual what's in the bottle, well, this is, I guess, Tumivara is where we started with the specific collaborations, because there's a guy in Normandy. His name is Didier Vécu, and he is a producer of Calvados, and the brand is Chateau du Bois. It's just about halfway. It's northeast Normandy, about halfway between Caen and Lyon. No, not Caen and I forget Rouen, and just north of Lisieux. So he produces Calvados. We spoke to Didier, and Didier sent us 5 400-liter Calvados casks. So I suppose this was our first sort of collaboration on a person-to-person basis. In other words, we know we know the provenance of the cask, is what I'm saying. We know the provenance of the cask. We developed it further than with Finisher's Touch, by the way, but I'll come to that in a moment. So Didier sent us the casks, and indeed, Tumivara has on its label the Chateau du Bois at the bottom. So in other words, we're giving you the provenance of the casks. Indeed, we have the logo of the Calvados maker on our bottle. So I guess that's an indication of the collaboration. We didn't know whether it would work or not. Let's face it, a lot of this stuff is experimental. We really didn't know. And there's a certain amount of trepidation when you're a small whiskey producer and you put a serious amount of very valuable, very expensive single malt whiskey into casks, and you wait to see what happens, and it's an interesting ride. But it turned out well, thank God. And Tumivara won a double gold in San Francisco. And in fact, for that particular show, it was the best single malt in their judgment, in their eyes, of that actual competition. So yes, we've been very pleased with Tumivara, and the reception for it has been very good. So maybe you'd like to taste that now, if that's okay, Luke.
That sounds like a plan. Can everyone hear me okay now? I've switched to different audio source, so my sincere apologies about that, folks. But thankfully, Sean, they all came to hear from you, not me. So I've got the Tumivara poured in front of me here, and I caught most, if not all, of that interesting tale. I would love to hear, as always, what everyone thinks. The nose isn't straight away isn't 100 miles away from the first one, but you definitely do pick up those kind of apple brandy kind of flavors, you know.
The other thing, I suppose, is with these, let's face it, it's all about finish these days, isn't it? But we've been kind of conscious of the need to ensure that it's a single malt. You know, it's a single malt whiskey. It might be finished with something, but that something shouldn't kind of elbow its way to the front. You know, it's finished in a cask that comes from elsewhere, a different drink, but it's still single malt. And let's face it, the single malt is 95% of what you're drinking. And I suppose we like the idea of a finish, but not a finish that finishes a single malt, if you know what I mean. It finishes it, but it doesn't finish it by dominating it, etc. And so, yeah, it's subtle. There's no question about it. And for anybody who's finishing whiskey, let's face it, the biggest decision of all is to decide when it's finished. And and if you're going to err, certainly we believe you err on the early side, not on the late side. So yes, there are hints of the apple there, but certainly it doesn't jump out. It doesn't jump out and hit you over the head like your Isaac Newton.
No, that's very true. That's very true. The more I go at it, I don't know about everyone else, but I get that there's a bit more of that kind of like green wood, kind of cut grass flavors underneath there. It's definitely got a more intriguing and complex nose than the first one. The more you kind of spend time in the glass. Not to sound too pretentious.
Yeah, just for myself personally. By the way, I should have said that all of the whiskies you're tasting, other than I can't remember if the special cask, the last one, is 46% or not, but all of these are 46%. Again, that's a big decision, as I'm sure you all know. What is the right strength to release it at? For myself personally, I taste it straight, but to me, it comes into its own, you know, about 50-50 with water, for me, in any event. But obviously, you'll all have your own preferences. I like the 12-year-old straight or straightish, but the Tumivara, I find I taste it and then I dilute it and then it's there.
And are these are all chill filtered, I presume, are they? As in, is you know the way the kind of the trend in the don't tell me
no, they're non-chill filtered.
They're non-chill filtered. All of them are non-chill filtered, eh?
Double distilled, non-chill filtered, and no colouring. There's no. I mean, not that there's any problem with colouring, but we haven't found the need to colour anything. No.
Yeah. No, perfect. Marie in the chat says lovely creamy notes of pear and green apples. I couldn't agree more.
I don't think it's as oily as the 12-year-old. It doesn't seem to be as viscous.
I might take your tip and try with a drop of water.
Oh, yeah. Well, just for myself anyway, that's the way.
I find it a bit more. I found it's a bit more tannic with a drop of water in it there, like, you know, in a good way, like, yeah, a bit more presence on the gums. I wonder if anyone else is finding that.
I don't know, Luke, if on your tastings you've ended up with discussions about ice in whiskey. It's a bit like Monty Python. It's a bit like Monty Python. You know, in our day we walked to school in our bare feet, etc. You know, but tell them today. But I don't think there should be any bias against ice. You know, in fact, one of the nice things about ice, in my opinion, is that, especially if it's relatively warm, is that you taste it straight, and then as you sip it on, you taste it more dilute. You know, and so you get the full spectrum of the taste, as long as the cold doesn't dominate. But I don't see that there should be any bias, or I don't think there should be any turning up of noses, you know, to the use of ice judiciously. Because if you put in half the volume of ice, even if you sip slowly, you certainly won't go past the 50-50, but you will get to the 50-50, and you'll get the full spectrum. You know, that's my opinion in any event.
Yeah, well, I suppose the
I
argument
think if our grandfathers had access to ice, they may have used it.
possibly. I know that the argument obviously is that you chill it, you dull the flavors, but well, the solution, the kind of the ground that we always come to here whenever the conversation does come up in the chats, is that once you're drinking Irish whiskey, then we don't care what you do with it, whether you add ice or water or Coke or mixer or whatever. Once you're contributing, because the idea is that we can have a preference as to how we like it. I personally wouldn't add ice unless it is like 30 degrees summer day. But I've nothing against it. But on a night like tonight, I wouldn't feel the need to.
I do the same. I do the same. If it's a sunny, if you're outside and it's sunny, then ice to me is perfectly sensible.
Yeah, exactly. But I'd never preach down on someone who did, who because obviously you want to remove that snobbiness from it, where people judge others on.
Definitely. Definitely. But anyway, that's Tumivara. And Tumivara, where Thomas came from, a little townland outside. And of course, as we know, lots of Tipperary people came to Dublin, and to put it mildly, a fair few of them were in the vintner's trade. In fact, if you got a train to Thurles on the day of a Munster hurling final, then I'd say half the train was full of was Tipperary publicans, if Tipperary were in the final,
Definitely.
Actually, there's a sporting connection. Jack Ryan's not hurling. Jack Ryan's brother Jim was a prop forward for Ireland. He was a 21-year-old student in Trinity, and he's a prop forward for Ireland in 1939.
Wow.
So he played 3 games for Ireland, and then he never played for Ireland again because a minor altercation intervened thereafter.
And what was that minor altercation? As in the Sorry?
World War II.
Oh, of course. No, that's brilliant. I suppose sometimes I feel like in those days, if you went to Trinity, you were an automatic pick for the Ireland team. But there you go.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Should have been hurling, I suppose.
Exactly. There was a Clarny man who went to Trinity in the 1930s who ended up boxing in the Olympics. But that's a digression there that we don't need to take.
yeah. But anyway, that's the Tumivara, Luke. The next one.
It's marvelous. We've got a few more comments on that coming in, Sean. From Emily says, I got lots more honey after adding water. David says the water adds a bit of apple for me. Strudel hints. I think strudel hints is a great tasting note. David's tasting notes are always top notch, I must say.
Yeah. I don't know if there's cinnamon in that. I'm not good at describing. I'm not good at describing.
David also said the 12-year-old more body. And Jared Kelly says, is the trilogy series limited? What's the?
Oh yes, sorry. I beg your pardon. They're all signed by Yunnan and numbered. And the Tumivara is 3,500 bottles. The Haddington is 3,500 bottles, and the Finisher's Touch is 6,000 bottles. So they're small releases. And there's still some left. I mean, it's not everywhere, and even the places that it is, in some cases, it's gone. We tried to go kind of a third USA, Canada, a third Ireland, and a third UK and Europe. And with the Tumivara, we could have probably sold it all in the USA, to be honest. Of course, that's a problem for small producers, as you probably know, that you could get one buyer that wants to buy the whole lot. So we could have had an importer in the States who would say we'll take all of the Tumivara, and so we would have sold it, but it would have done nothing for our brand or for the story or for developing the whiskey. So it's always a bit of a there's constructive tension in between selling the whiskey and building the brand and communicating the story. It's a nice-ish problem to have, but it's an issue.
No, certainly that came up with we did our fruit tasting a few weeks back, and they mentioned that each of their releases were 6,000 bottles, and the risk is trying to walk that line between all of one supplier in America taking everything and trying to get it across the getting little bits of some of it into all different markets. So it's definitely a good problem to have though for emerging companies like yourselves.
It's another couple of interesting developments as well. Again, people might be interested that Brexit has changed a few things as well. For example, our US importer is Pacific Edge. They're on the West Coast over in the Bay Area. And I guess like a lot of importers in the States, they order their drinks, in Europe, and then they consolidate all their orders in one place, and then they make a big shipment back over, their brandy, their whiskey, their gin, whatever they're ordering from Europe. So they order from all the producers and they consolidate the order in one place. And the one place that they used to consolidate was in a place that's called the UK, which isn't actually part of the EU anymore. And so it's been very complicated for them. And our latest order for the States has gone directly to the States because it just was too complicated for them to bring it into the UK. In fact, they'll probably start consolidating their orders, even though, let's face it, they buy lots of scotch. They'll probably start consolidating their orders in the Netherlands. So Brexit will have effects, and actually, Tumivara, because we have a bonded warehouse where we have our casks and we age and finish the whiskey, and we also bottle there, but we didn't have the bond when Tumivara was being bottled. So we actually sent our IBCs up to Derry, to Niche in Derry. So this was bottled in Derry. I was up for the first day of the bottling, as though they needed me to tell them what to do. But anyway, I was there for it. But complicated as that was, because we were moving liquor across a border, complicated with Her Majesty's revenue, etc. But complicated as that was, it couldn't happen today, I don't think. It's just unusual.
It's had a massive impact for us as a company. I mean, we do a lot of business with, or did a lot of business with the States through online shipping, which we're not able to do and haven't been able to do since January, because our courier who was supplying to America, it was going via the UK, and they haven't changed their routes, but we were getting double hit on import duties because the UK customs were charging the import, and then we're being charged again going into America, and that's not a sustainable business model. But so we've had to suspend it at the moment, and even we organised the Irish Whiskey Awards, and even doing 2 of these tastings. We did a tasting with Gelston's Irish Whiskey, who obviously it's distilled in Ireland, but they're owned and operated out of the north of England. So the bottles had to come to us from there. Massive Brexit delays. We had to move the day of the tasting, and also we did a Tamdhu tasting with fantastic Speyside whiskey by Ian McLeod, and again that had to be moved back a month in the tasting date because bottles got held up in customs. So it's definitely had a massive impact on the trade. Yeah.
One of the things that maybe has helped a bit, maybe people want to move on to the next whiskey because I guess you want to taste rather than talk the technical bit.
That's a good point.
I didn't know this, by the way. I didn't know this till I started, by the way. But obviously in the States, where the quantity has to be 75 cl, it's not the same bottle, because you might think that 5 cl, sure, it's easy, add another 5 cl. It isn't. Now that's another 50. If you try to add 50 mils to this, it's up under the capsule. So actually, it's a different bottle. For the States, it's a different bottle. It looks almost the same, but the shoulder's slightly higher. It fits in the same box, etc., but it's not the same bottle. So therefore, if you haven't made a decision as to what you're going to sell in the States, or sorry, up to recently, then that's that. If you decided you're going to sell so many bottles to the States and you had them sold, well, then that was that. But there's a change now, because in the States, they will sell the European size bottle. So that's a bit of a help, and it's a bit of a change. I don't know if that change was going to come anyway, or whether Brexit had any influence. I don't really know, Luke. You might know more than I do.
I knew that change was coming in, but I don't know what influenced it. I know that you see with a lot of companies who try and get their product out fast, or who are smaller scale operators, they'll bottle in Ireland at the 75 cl bottles. So you see a lot of bottles where they do it in reverse. So it's 70 cls of whiskey, but you'll see the top of the bottle looks almost half empty because you see that with like, I mean, I know the first release of Proper 12, not to offend any whiskey listen on here, but their first release was all in 75 cl bottles, but with the volume inside of liquid inside being smaller. I picked up a couple of bottles. They're under my bed. I won't tell anyone I have them. But
whiskey with a kick.
Literally. Yeah, literally.
Okay. Do you want to move on to the second one?
Yes, good idea.
Okay, so it's called Haddington because the Generation Trilogy and Thomas started up on Haddington Road, which is where the Beggars Bush is. Now this one is finished in old rum. Now this label does not have the name of a producer because we couldn't be 100% sure that all 10 casks that we were using, rum casks, were from the same producer, the Diamond Distillery rum in Guyana. And we felt, in fairness, if there were two casks, the provenance of which we couldn't be sure of, we would just say rum finish. And that's, I guess, that's probably as good an illustration of what I'm talking about as any, that we haven't got Guyana distillery on it because we can't be sure that two of the casks, were from there. They were old rum casks, and we brought them from Lexington. We brought 200 casks from Lexington, 100 bourbon, maybe a bit more, 15 virgin oak. I'll talk about those virgin oak casks in a moment, and 10 rum. In any event, the 10 rum with the aged 10-year-old single malt produced Haddington. And so this is a rum finish. And again, we didn't get to enter this in anything in the last year or so, because we've entered it this year in the Irish Whiskey Awards, and we're entering it in the San Francisco World Spirits along with the Finisher's Touch. So I guess the Haddington has been kind of quiet. It's a rum finish, and maybe we should pour it, and Luke, you could talk a little bit what you find in it.
Yeah, perfect. We actually did while you're pouring it there, we did a rum tasting, which included a Diamond Distillery rum from Guyana, and it was, if my memory serves me correctly, it was absolutely stunning rum. So hopefully the whiskey lives up to it.
And of course, what makes it sort of interesting is that distillery is gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone.
Yeah.
Again, the story behind the whiskey, I presume it's the same for the people who are on the Zoom. And as I said before, the sense of smell and taste is they're ancient senses. They're linked, of course, and they're in the amygdala, and the amygdala is about emotions and memories. You all know that a smell can evoke a memory, the smell of a turf fire if you come from the country and you remember it as a child. And so my own theory, for what it's worth, is that when you hear the story of a whiskey, it changes the taste of a whiskey, almost by definition. And it's not about imagination, really. It's about the amygdala, and because that's where the sense of taste and smell is rooted.
No, it's very suggestive, and it's very emotive as well. It's what we love about it. I think everyone will agree. Fergus says spice on the nose. Definitely kind of like definitely molasses. Well, yeah, you're right. I get a small bit of a kind of a white pepperiness.
But again, whether we're right or wrong, it's understated. It's not taking over the single malt, because there's no business taking over the single malt.
Although it is quite different in the first two, I find. There's less of those kind of orchard fruit flavors, and you are definitely more in an oaky kind of caramelly kind of world.
We thought it would come out darker, but it didn't, which is sort of interesting. I think I think your instinct would be that it should be a darker whiskey, because it's in a cask that held a dark spirit, but actually it doesn't. Now maybe if it was in it for a long time it would, but then maybe it would be more rum than whiskey then, But it's just interesting that it's a bit darker than the 12-year-old, but it's not particularly. It's not much darker.
Yeah, well, I suppose the darker spirit has already taken a lot of the color from the cask, though. But
I guess, yeah.
We do tend to find with that it's the kind of virgin oak, or if it's a really dark kind of winey flavors that tends to give the bigger colors rather than another darker spirit, But I'm not speaking from any ground of authority there. I'm just saying in our experience tasting so far. But yeah, I mean, we've got the stunning colors in the back bar. If you see behind me here, the ones that always look the most stunning from a distance tend to be the very, very old sherry casks. I mean, from like the 60s and 70s, and the virgin oak whiskies. The virgin oak single casks come out some stunning colors, as I'm sure most people on the conversation already know.
Yeah. But I guess I like the Haddington. I don't want to say which is my favorite of the trilogy. That would be a very silly thing to do, wouldn't it? But I do like the Haddington.
You'll have to tell us at the end, because I'm going to be asking everyone else.
And Fifth Amendment, is that what they call it, or First Amendment? First Amendment.
No, I think it's Fifth Amendment, which prevents you from perjuring yourself. Like, yeah. Not perjuring yourself, but yeah. But we're going to be, I suppose, leaning on your First Amendment right before the end. It's really it's gorgeous actually on the palate. It's kind of fruity, spicy, nutty. It's really interesting. We'd love to hear what people think in the chat. I can see some very concentrated faces tasting away there. But Vitaly, have you got any opinions on the flavor? Oh, he's typing. Lovely. That's good. Jared Kelly says, really like them all. Emily says, cantaloupe. Cantaloupe is a great tasting note. I would never have pulled that, but as soon as you say it, it's there. It's as the suggestive nature of it all. Thomas says roasted pineapple. That's another very good one. Yeah.
I must confess, I've never had a roasted pineapple other than in my childhood when it sat across a thing called a gammon steak. I don't know if any of your
yeah. Well, I mean, so you've never had a roasted pineapple. I think my touchstone mentally for that would be on a pizza, I suppose, like, you know.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think in Italy that's some people think that the Pope frowns on pizza with pineapple.
Yeah, well, that's why it's only come into Irish pizzerias since the marriage equality referendum. That was the moment when they decided that this is a new Ireland. We're going to have pineapple on pizza.
Gotcha. I understand now.
Maria says, pineapple on pizza, don't get me started. So there you go. We've touched on a controversial topic. David said that's a great whiskey, the sunny day during outdoor opening.
Okay.
If we get a sunny day during outdoor opening. Sorry, he was referring to the pub's opening. My apologies. That was my bad reading of that comment. But yeah, no, definitely. No, it's an exceptional. And so you said the Lexington cooperage is where you got the casks from. How do you find dealing with a big
the initial ones now?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, we got the biggest single tranche from there, but we've got them from other places since. But that was the single biggest tranche. We got them through Alltech, Luke.
Mm-hmm.
And
so it was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So and it's for a small outfit, like, because we are a small outfit, you know, it's a serious investment to go sourcing your own casks. So we sourced those. We sourced the Calvados casks. We sourced. I'll tell you about the finisher's touch, which is the most interesting story of all, in a moment. But we've sourced the Diamond Rum Distillery casks. We've sourced. We have a series we've started called the Ryan Cask Elite Finishes, and the idea is single cask or cask strength, really small releases, like of 200 or 300 bottles. And the first one is out there. It's not part of the tasting today, which is a Finca Museum, and the Finca Museum Rioja. And why? Well, because Finca Museum is Yunnan Ryan's favorite wine. Why not? And he knew the importer, and he got a cask, and we tried it. And talk about color. That's a really interesting color. You know, it is. I think you'd have to officially classify it as red, not gold. You know, not yellow, not entirely red, but it's a really interesting color. But anyway, that's the first of the Ryan Cask Elite finishes. So we've cast. The other thing is we're doing collaborations with a couple of craft artisan type brewers as well. For example, we have casks. I'm based in Galway. We have casks here in Oranmore with Galway Hooker, with Aidan Murphy of Galway Hooker. He has some of our casks, and he's got right now actually Imperial Stout in them, and he hopes to get a good stout out of them, and we hope to get an interesting whiskey back, you know, for casks that have had Imperial Stout in them. And we have a similar collaboration going on with Seamus McMahon up in Monaghan with Brehon, a brew house. Mm-hmm. And it's like-minded because McMahon's family goes back a long time on the same patch of land. You know, a long time on the same patch of land. Yunnan and he hit it off big time. And so again, we've got casks up with Brehon, and he's also doing an Imperial Stout, and he hopes to get an interesting stout, and we hope to get an interesting whiskey. In fact, we're going to call the whiskey, hope when we get it back, Raglan Road. We don't think it's been done. McMahon's are close to where Kavanagh was from, and of course, the Beggar's Bush is pretty close to the canal, etc. So we just think it's a reasonable kind of name to give a collaboration finish. We don't think we're being cheeky or impertinent calling it Raglan Road, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And so it's just an example of the collaborations. We are going to release other single cask or cask strength Calvados, Madeira. We were even thinking, we don't think it's been done, and perhaps it hasn't been done because it can't be done, a Kirschwasser, a cherry brandy. But we're not sure if it's doable because they tend to store Kirschwasser in ash casks, which are very inert. So we could go to the trouble of getting some casks over to discover that they were basically not interested in playing, So, but that's all part of the fun, just coming up with interesting things. With respect to the beer collaboration, Luke, that's an interesting one because, ordinarily for a fortified wine, you're talking about a high alcohol liquid, and so therefore, in terms of the sterility of the cask, you're not too worried if there's a little bit of a time gap between it being emptied and it being filled with whiskey. But with an imperial stout, or indeed any ale, really you need to put whiskey in it almost as soon as it's emptied. So one of the jobs we'll have with both Brehon Brewhouse and with Corey Hooker is to have all of our ducks, lined up, so that the day that they decide the beer is done, we're going to take it out. We get the casks back that day and put whiskey in them that day. Just to cut down
logistical operation.
worry about bacteria, which is not a worry you have for fortified wines or for other spirits, obviously. They're just little interesting tidbits that maybe people would be interested in.
No, that's brilliant. That's exactly what we log on for.
But in terms of just pure stories, the third of the trilogy, The Finisher's Touch, is the most interesting story. I suppose I'm hooked on it because I was so intimately involved in it myself. And I suppose that the story is that Justino's Madeira on Madeira Island, which, by the way, Madeira Island is as far away as Cairo. It's 2,250 kilometers away. But anyway, Conroy met Juan Teixeira, the owner of Justino's, just to talk about a possible collaboration. And then subsequently, Yunnan met Juan at the German fair, the Vine, Pro Vine, in the annual fair in Germany. And we hatched a plan. And the plan was that we would send Juan 18 casks. So we actually sent casks to Madeira. Now, by the way, I don't think Yunnan fully understood that Madeira wasn't, a bus ride away from Lisbon. But anyway, we sent 18 casks to Madeira, which was, to put it mildly, was interesting. Just trying to get the casks there, from Dublin, because there's not, obviously there isn't exactly a direct shipping route from Dublin to Madeira Island. So it went, it went through Europe and then by sea around, because Madeira is a lot closer to Morocco than it is to Portugal, as you know. Anyway, so Juan put young 3-year-old sweet Madeira in them, and anyway, when that was over, we got the casks back and we put whiskey in them, and that's what produced Finisher's Touch. But the whole Madeira story is a really interesting story, because you would imagine, I mean, I'm sure some of you know a lot about Madeira, but perhaps some of you don't, Madeira wine. But we think of casks sort of doing their job in cold or cool darkness quietly. But that's not what Madeira wine is. Madeira wine is a very unusual wine because in the 15th century, when the New World, not new to the people who were living there already, by the way, but when the New World was opening up, there was a lot of ships were going to the New World, and they were stopping off on Madeira because, after all, it's off the coast of Africa. It's a good chunk of the way over, and stocking up with fluid, including wine. I suppose we'll forgive them because the wine was probably safer than the water. But anyway, they'd stocked up with wine. But the problem was the wine mightn't make it all the way across, without going off. So they fortified it initially because the higher the alcohol, the less chance of it going off or becoming infected or whatever. I can't think of the word. But anyway, so they initially fortified it with cane liquor, cane alcohol. And they discovered, I think because of a shipment that came back unused, that actually the journey seemed to do something to the wine. And what the journey was doing was heating the wine. So I won't bore you, except to say that they discovered that Madeira wine was what it was because it was cooked. It was cooked wine. The Madeira was spending a lot of its time at temperatures, because let's face it, these ships were crossing the equator. They were going to the Caribbean. And so basically it's cooked wine. Now, rather than spend an hour talking about Madeira wine, suffice it to say that in Madeira now, there's an attempt to recreate what the ship journeys did to Madeira those centuries ago. So therefore, in Justinos, what Juan does, they call it the estufagem method of making Madeira wine, and I think they call it cantero. Anyway, I'm not showing off because I can't pronounce the words anyway. But basically, what they do is they expose the casks to the heat and the sun, and for 6 months the wine is kept between about 45 and 55 degrees. So it's actually cooked wine, and that's probably why also Madeira wine lasts virtually forever. If you open a bottle of Madeira and cork it half decently, it'll outlast you if you let it. And because if you like, in some ways it's pasteurized, it's sterilized, and it's oxidized. So it's a very unusual wine. It's cooked, and so then it's not like other fortified wines that are stored at relatively cool temperatures. It's a most unusual wine, a most unusual story, and indeed. I'm sorry, I said the New World. Way back in the 15th century, it was the East Indies that was the long trips over to the Spice Islands that caused the wine to deteriorate, and the wine benefited from fortification. But then subsequently in the New World, Madeira was the drink of choice in the States for a long time, because it could make it over there safely, etc. Anyway, subsequently they didn't fortify it with the cane sugar; they fortified it with it's a grape. I think it's called Tinta Negra Mole. It's just an unusual grape. And in any event, so our casks sat in the sun and the heat on Madeira Island and did their thing. As Juan says, they were seasoned, Sean. They were seasoned. And after he was seasoning them, we brought them back. And that produced Finisher's Touch and of course the Justinos label on it as well. And so it's a very interesting story, because it wasn't, for example, in the case of the Chateau du Bois, Didier sent us casks, his casks. But in the case of the Finisher's Touch, we sent the casks to Justinos, and they seasoned our casks, and we got our casks back and we made this whiskey. So much traveled casks, because those casks started off in Lexington, Kentucky. And so they came over to Ireland, then they went off the coast of Africa, and then they came back to us, and you're tasting the whiskey produced from them now. You mentioned earlier, Luke, before you tasted, and I'll shut up because I know you want to drink your whiskey, but we also sent him 15 virgin oak casks, and he has older, slightly drier Madeira in those. Now, they could be very interesting, because as you know, virgin oak casks, what they do to a spirit, they do it kind of quickly, because it's virgin oak and there's a lot of vanilla to be released, a lot of vanillin to be released. So there's still Madeira in those. We have 15 virgin. Well, they're not virgin oak now. Let's face it, they're Madeira casks now, because they were virgin oak, so they're Madeira casks. And we have 5 bourbon casks there, and we're already wondering exactly what to do with these virgin oak when we get them back, because it could be a most interesting finish. So far, we've avoided mixed finishes. We don't say this is finished in a mix of sherry and Madeira, or we like to think of it as being a story. And this is definitely a story. It's us and Justinos, and it's not kind of us and sherry that we don't have the provenance of, and something else we don't have the provenance of. Now it's just a story. It's just a story, and we hope that it makes for an interesting whiskey. And as I said earlier, for me, I can't taste the Finisher's Touch without thinking of the ship journeys and the wine kind of almost simmering, But so therefore, my taste is going to be affected by what I've learned and the story that was built up around this. God knows what you'll taste when you taste it. So I'll shut up now.
No, I mean, only I'm not sorry, tongue tied there. It's a fascinating story. I mean, I don't want you to shut up only for the fact that I am dying now to taste this whiskey. So it's not that it's not interesting, but it's got a gorgeous nose. It's really, really orangey. I suppose just so everyone's on the same page, we are coming on to the Finisher's Touch now. Yeah, it's extraordinary. It's so different to the the first ones. You mentioned about kind of keeping that single malt characteristic, but it's very kind of disguised on the nose. It's like so marmalade-y and orangey, and I mean, Emily mentioned clementine and the clementine with the last one earlier in the chat, and I definitely get that on the nose here. Wow, it's gorgeous. One of my favorite whiskies of recent years was the what you call Tyrconnell Madeira cask finish.
Yeah,
and
I think that won an Irish Whiskey Award. That was a lovely whiskey too.
Yeah, no, it was stunning, and obviously the spirit is of the same provenance. But I think this actually is probably more true to what a Madeira tastes like. You know, it's probably even a bit more Madeiriness off this. If I'm correct, I haven't tried the other one in about a year and a half. So, but it's a really good whiskey.
Just while you're tasting it, Luke, I guess the people who are on this Zoom call like whiskey. They're interested in whiskey, and I suppose we kind of felt that we should do something about maybe bridging a gap with release between people who wouldn't spend 50 or 60 or more euros on a bottle of whiskey and those who would. And so what we're going to do, we're actually in the process now of doing it, is we're bringing out a 3-pack of the trilogy, 50 mils of each of them, and we've the pack designed. By the way, those bottles come with all of those bottles come with a free poem on the box, written by yours truly.
Is each one a unique poem?
No, look, it's the same poem. But anyway, I wrote a poem, and if you're very good, I'll read it to you at the end. But in any event, we're bringing out a 3-pack, the Generation Trilogy 3-pack, and the idea is, I suppose, if who would spend 60 or 70 or more euro, on a single malt without maybe having some sense as to what it tastes like. So and maybe people who are used to spending 25 or 30 on a whiskey and don't want to make the jump to 60 or 70 just on blind faith. So anyway, and we're not the only company doing this. We figured we'd bring out a 3-pack of minis because it is a trilogy, and people get a chance to taste the 3 of them side by side. And if they like one or other or whatever, then they can buy a full bottle. I know lots of companies are doing it, and I guess what I'm saying is we're joining the fray, I suppose, is really what I'm saying.
Well, I suppose you're also hitting that kind of intra-European tourist market, in the sense that, like myself and my partner, if we can, like I know, like Donny and Kerry Farrell 4 flies out to Berlin, and you go to places like Portugal, and you want to bring back the, because we're drinks enthusiasts, so you want to bring back the local spirit and the local beer, but obviously you can't bring it on the plane, but in the miniatures you can, so there's that from that point of view as well. It means if someone came and drank Jack wine in a bar in Dublin and greatly enjoyed it, they can take it on the plane with them, or
yeah, that's true, yeah. So anyway, we hope to have it but sometime later this summer.
No, that sounds good.
We have high hopes for, well, I shouldn't say that. We would like to think that these will do well in competition this year, but obviously, time will tell.
Well, I mean, there was a comment earlier from Vitaly who said, I never tried Jack Ryan whiskey before, but now I'm really surprised until now, and I'm really surprised how gorgeous they really are. Please keep doing what you do. So, you've got one nod of encouragement there. So if you keep up the good work, I'm sure it will all come in.
Thank you for the encouragement. Not all of our experiments will be successful, but the ones that aren't successful, we'll try not to send your way.
You got to speculate to accumulate. You got to break a few eggs to make an omelette. So. No, there's Declan O'Donovan in the chat says Madeira smooth as silk. It's a really, really top quality whiskey, Sean, and you've gone for very interesting finishes on all of them. I mean, from the Calvados to this one, it's not ones that it's not your cliched sherry cask release.
Well, what we say is that particularly with the Ryan cask release finishes, that we're looking for classic, eclectic, and novel, because bourbon finish will always be there and it's classic. Mm-hmm. And why would you decide that you don't want that anymore? It's classic and it's there. But the eclectic ones, just unusual ones, we're interested in. They might work, they might not work. And then the novel, I suppose, if Kirschwasser works, that'll definitely be novel. The Imperial Stout ones, I suppose, are a little bit eclectic, and we'll see. We'll just see.
They are hard to get right, the beer finish ones. Like, I think
and both Aidan here in Galway Hooker and Seamus up in Brehon, from what they understand anyway, anytime people have used lower ABV beers, that's hard to get something from it. That's why independently those two craft brewers chose an Imperial Stout of around 6% or more. So and I know there are whiskies finished in IPAs, but I must say I never did check to see what kind of ABV IPA they were using, because I think it's hard to get a lot with a very low ABV. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Well, I don't know what ones they were using. I know obviously IPAs can have very high ABVs. They actually have, I suppose, the beer has a very similar story to the one in the Madeira one you were saying, in that they were brewed extra strong for export, to survive those long journeys down past the equator. So maybe they're using a higher ABV. I don't know, but I know Seamus from Brehon quite well. We deal with him in the bar.
Okay.
We carry the just the Stony Grey IPA on draft down in Clarny, and it was one of our it's one of our most popular IPAs, and we've loved working with Brehon since we opened in 2016. It's been on draft, and we've got 14 taps, and a lot of them have changed. You have natural churn, and beers go through life cycles where they're selling and one's not selling. And but the Stony Grey is always held strong, so he's always a good man to call.
Yeah, we're glad to hear that, because we certainly, we felt that he was somebody well worth partnering with. We felt that strongly. But Luke, the last whiskey, I'm afraid I am a bit handicapped, because I forgot to get my own personal sample of this special cask. So all I can do is tell you about it and hand over to you. I told you about the 18 casks we brought from the States, sent off Africa, brought back, and made finisher's touch from. Well, again, you may all know how we sample whiskey. We sample it regularly, because let's face it, we want to get it out of the cask when it's ready. So the way we tend to do it is, let's say it's 20 casks, we'll sample the first, the 6th, the 11th, something like that. And then the next time we sample the 2nd, the 7th, etc., just so we get a good sense that all's well with all of them. But when we had these 18 casks that came back from Madeira, one cask our tasters felt was exceptional. And so we've actually kept that cask aside. So the finisher's touch is from 17 of those casks. What you're about to taste is from the other one, the exceptional one, which of course is already out of cask in an IBC, ready for one of these either cask strength or single cask releases. So that's cask 89. I think it's cask 89. We haven't given it a name yet. So it will be the 2nd or 3rd of those Ryan cask elite finishes. And I haven't tasted it myself. So there you are.
Oh, well, there you go. This is an exciting moment for everyone listening in. I hope you appreciate the gravity and the seriousness of this. Yeah. It might be a good time to get it poured and get us warmed up for that. So I've poured mine now here. It smells really good. I was hand bottling these myself with my colleague Aidan, and it was one of those ones where we were tempted to take a sip, take an advanced sip, but we couldn't, because with bottles like that, when they come in the samples, you can't waste a drop, because if you ever need to send out a broken pack or anything, you can't just pull another one off the shelf. So they had to wait for this moment. I believe, because they only came to, the information we have on it is Madeira cask number 89. Do you have any rough idea what ABV it might be, Sean?
I think you got that at cask strength. Does it taste cask strength, Luke?
It definitely smells cask strength. I haven't tasted it yet.
Yeah, because I'm sorry that I don't have extra information. I'm in Galway, and things are a bit, logistics can be a bit complicated these days. But I think it is cask strength. Yeah.
And you reckon cask strength for you guys would normally, of this age, it's probably what about 56, 50, 55% around there, I'd say, would it be?
Yeah. Well, the Finca, believe it or not, I know this sounds like a made-up figure, is 58.1.
58.1, very good.
Yeah. But I guess it should be around 57. Let's face it.
Yeah.
But I have to stress that we may release that at cask strength or not. It just depends on what the feeling is. In fact, perhaps actually you'll guide us. If people do feel that at that strength you like it, maybe that's what we'll bottle it at. So actually, I'd appreciate your feedback to tell you the truth.
Well, it smells gorgeous. I think it smells a bit like almost like a sponge cake. I'm not going to say Madeira cake but it definitely smells. It's got more kind of more baking flavor notes inside. Jared Kelly says yes, it is cask strength to me, so I think that's definite. On the nose, it's I'll give it a taste. We'll jump in. Jared says, release it, please. Let it free. Wow. That is gorgeous. It's way sweeter on the palate than I found the last one to be. And maybe that's the strength as well. I don't know, but it's
yeah. Well, maybe we will release it at cask strength. I'll talk to Yunnan and I'll tell Yunnan that we had our own version of Eurovision tonight, and that the jury was interested in cask strength.
Well, let's get some more information from our gang listening in, because Jared gives it 12 points. Deuce point. And David says very drinkable at cask strength, and he's not a crusader. So the cask strength crusaders come up here a lot, showing the people who want to see more whiskies. Fergus says yes, please, absolutely gorgeous. Tina and Carsten says yes, please release it at cask strength. That's fantastic. So I'm guessing that also means the people prefer it to the finisher's touch. I suppose a yes or no. And maybe while you're at that, if you want to say whether it's better than the finisher's touch and what your favorite one of the lineup is, and maybe Sean, if you want to give us some hints as to what your favorite one is of the tasting
of the trilogy
of everything that we've tried tonight. Obviously, you haven't tried the Madeira cask, but of the first four, I suppose.
Look, I mean, since taste and smell are evocative, and since I was so intimately involved with the finisher's touch, I have to say the finisher's touch.
Fair enough, yeah.
But that's for me. That's for me.
Jack in the chat says Haddington all day and night. So there you go. And the finisher's touch, if you are looking, is €89. So I think it's a bit more expensive than the other two. In the trilogy.
Oh yeah, I forgot to say, silly of me, Tumivara is 10-year-old, Haddington's 11-year-old, and finisher's touch is 12-year-old.
So they're moving up in age as well. David says, I'm going to say Tumivara to avoid recency bias, but it could be this. And that's an interesting one as well, because we often say on these tastings, or I do anyway, that if I was doing a tasting sometime, I'd love to put the whiskey that I objectively thought was the nicest among there in the middle or at the start, and see, because it is difficult when you've drank 5 whiskeys, the last one always tastes the best, but,
yeah.
Vitaly says, can't choose my favorite tonight, also good, maybe the finisher's touch though. So some great feedback there. And Sean, if you weren't drinking something from the Jack Ryan range, what would be your go-to?
Oh God, wow, you really got me there. Well, I mean, with whiskey, it's a bit like, for me, it's a bit like music. There are only 2 types of music: good music and bad music. So again, just as when we were talking about the ice, I don't believe in the kind of snobbishness at all. So for example, I spend a fair bit of time every year in Greece, and they like the whiskey in Greece, and so I've tasted a lot of different whiskies. For example, I like the corn taste of Maker's Mark. I like it, even though it's completely different from what we're talking about here. I like the John's Lane pot still. I like that. I definitely like that. Even the regular powers I like. The regular powers. Let me see what else. But I must say, one of the reasons that I haven't spoken too much about him is that, as I mentioned earlier, I have a bottle here of Jack Ryan Trevor, which appears to be leaky, and perhaps that's a statement.
That's a statement of itself. Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, they're all. That's good. I mean,
I guess that's for me. I must confess that if I'm at home, I'd have a whiskey and ice. If I'm out, I'd have maybe, you know, say 2 pints of black stuff and then a whiskey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
no, that's
and this,
good.
this would often be it.
And they're all strong choice. The Maker's Mark, I think, is a really top quality whiskey. I think the Maker's Mark and Buffalo Trace are two bourbons that I think people because they get used in mixology and other things, and people have preconceptions around bourbon who aren't into whiskey. I mean, I'm sure no one on here does, but people who aren't into whiskey have this idea that it's more like a Jack Daniel's than what bourbon really is, because obviously we all know Jack Daniel's in the bourbon, but I think that there's that popular misconception out there. And Maker's Mark is really great, and so is the John's Lane is one of my favorite whiskies of all time. We did a John's Lane deconstruction night on Zoom with Derek from Powers Whiskey, and it was probably one of the best tastings we've ever done. We tried virgin oak, a bourbon, and 2 different sherry casks, all the components that make up the John's Lane, all cask samples. It was stunning evening. So no, they're all great choices. I'm just going to go to some feedback in the chat there again. We had, so Fergus says 89 and Tumavara. We got Finisher's Touch or the last one, both exceptional. Petra / Peter says the Madeiras. Shane O'Connor says 3, 4, 2, 1. So he actually thinks the Finisher's Touch is nicer than the Castron, so that's interesting. All really good and great stories behind them all. So sorry, he's actually he's not put in the Castron at all. So obviously, I was wrong. The 4 was the Finisher's Touch, and the Haddington would be 3. So Haddington was his favorite. Could listen to Sean all evening. If I buy a bottle, can I call him and have a chat about it before we drink it? So that's high praise there, Sean.
Oh, no, not after drinks it. After drinks it.
Well, I think it's a she. If it's Maria, I think so. Tina says, I already have the Tumavara at home. Tasted at Celtic Whiskey Bar and Larder in Clarney. So there you go. Jared says, love Sean's casual and relaxed presentation. One of our favorites. Great ambassador. Tomas says, Haddington on a regular day and 89 on a special day. And Petra Peter says, thanks a lot. That's some fantastic feedback there. That's really brilliant. Vitaly says, many thanks, Sean and Luke, for such a wonderful whiskey selection. I usually continue the tasting night with some other whiskey, but not really sure what for my back compared to those hard choices. And Stephen Randalls says, fantastic presentation by Sean, one of the most down-to-earth tastings I've been on, with some of the better whiskies I've tasted. Jack Dunn says, thanks for the evening, guys. Much appreciated. Fingers crossed for a bourbon night soon. All really good. And I'm going to press here because they're fantastic comments, and I'm worried that people are going to zone out here and log off. But obviously, you've got a poem coming for us, Sean, have you? You're going to have to after that. A poem coming for us.
No, you're all invited around later on.
No, I would say you were going to read us your poem.
Oh, sorry, the poem. Yeah. The poem. I beg your pardon. Okay. Well, now, are you ready?
Yes. Okay. Well, I certainly am. I hope everyone else is.
The finisher's learned touch is sure, weds precious malt to barrel pure. The match thus made a watch is kept, the finisher's patient gaze adept. The finisher senses when it's time to breach the oaken dark sublime, withdraw gold samples deferential, taste and ponder reverential. The finisher's symphonic task of harmonizing malt and cask, its final note, the special one, that perfect sample whispers, done. The finisher's apprentice stores the forebears' secrets, arts, and lores. Successor malts by such and such, all charge and raise to the finisher's touch.
That's fantastic. That really is brilliant, and it's very evocative poem. Really, like I suppose brilliant imagery there, and it could also be the story of a classic number 9, an Alan Shearer, the finisher's touch. but no, that really is. I'm not just saying it because we're here on the Zoom together. That's very, very poetic, very, very well done, and excellent, Sean, in the chat there as well. And David says perfect bookend for the evening. So I totally agree. And Fergus said this just before the poems that have done many of these tasting, Sean's, and one of the best, and the whiskies too. So that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing this evening with us.
Thanks for having me. Good luck, everybody. Thank you.
No, it's been great. So I think that's a perfect moment to end it. So thanks, everyone. And we'll see you all soon.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Cheers.